Have you ever heard a story that was just too strange to be true? A story that, I don't know, made the hair on your arm stand up? Maybe a story that made you check the locks on your doors at night. Most people hear these kinds of tales and, honestly, they just laugh. They call them urban legends. They call them ghost stories. They say, well, such things could never happen in the real world. They tuck their children into bed and tell them there are no monsters hiding in the closet. They are safe. They are sound. But are they really? What if the stories were true? Sometimes the most unbelievable tales are the ones happening right under our noses. We just don't want to see them. We choose to look away. We tell ourselves it's just a coincidence. It's just a trick of the light. Or, a sound carried on the wind. We create logical explanations for things that have no logic. We do this to feel secure. We do this because honestly, the alternative is just too frightening to consider. But ignoring a monster doesn't make it go away. It just gives it more time to get closer. It just lets the darkness creep in, unnoticed, until it is too late. This is a story like that. It is a story about a sound that should not exist. It came in the dead of night when the world was supposed to be sleeping and silent. It whispered through the airwaves, a phantom voice in the static. At first, no one paid it any mind. It was just noise, just interference from some distant, forgotten transmitter. But then, people started to listen. They started to listen very closely, and what they heard would change everything. They would wish they had never tuned in at all. So the next time you hear a strange story, a story that seems impossible, pause for a moment. Think about it. Do not dismiss it so quickly. Ask yourself if it could be true, because the line between what is real and what is a story is thinner than you think. Sometimes the stories are not just stories. Sometimes they are warnings, and this is a warning. A warning about a signal that came from nowhere and a voice that spoke of death. A warning that you should listen to very carefully. It began on a Tuesday, or maybe it was a Wednesday. The days kind of blur together when you work the night shift. Leo was a radio technician. He sat in a small, quiet room filled with glowing screens and blinking lights. His job was to monitor the airwaves. He listened for problems. He listened for dead air. He listened for anything out of the ordinary. Most nights were the same. The same old songs, the same commercials, the same talk show hosts droning on about things that didn't matter. It was boring, but it was his job. That night, something new appeared. It was a faint signal. It was on a frequency that was supposed to be empty. 88.9 FM. Leo frowned. He adjusted his equipment. He turned a few dials and pushed a few buttons. The signal grew stronger. It was not music. It was not a talk show. It was a voice. A flat, monotone voice. It sounded like it was being read from a long, long list. The voice was calm. It was steady. It was completely devoid of any emotion. It was just there, speaking into the void. Leo leaned closer to his speakers. He could not make out the words at first. They were just sounds, muffled by a thick blanket of static. He tweaked the filters. He isolated the frequency. Slowly, the voice became clearer. It was reading names, just names, one after another. Robert Anderson, the voice said, Maria Sanchez, David Chen, Emily Peterson. The list went on and on. There were no explanations, no context, just a seemingly endless stream of ordinary names spoken into the darkness of the night. He listened for over an hour. The voice never stopped. It never paused for breath. It just kept reading. Leo felt a strange chill run down his spine. This was not a prank. It was too persistent. It was too strange. Who would broadcast a list of names on an unused frequency in the middle of the night? And why? He made a note in his logbook. 2:14 a.m. Unidentified signal on 88.9 FM. Monotone voice reading a list of names. Source unknown. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The next night, the signal was back. Same time, same station, same voice. Leo was waiting for it. He had his recording equipment ready. As soon as the static cleared and the voice began, he started recording. Susan Miller, James Williams, Patricia Brown. The names were different from the night before. A whole new list. Leo listened, captivated and unnerved. He had a strange feeling, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He felt like he was listening to something he wasn't supposed to hear, something private, something forbidden. He did something he had never done before. He took the list of names home with him. He was a curious man. That was why he was good at his job. He wanted to know what this was. He sat at his computer and typed the first name from the previous night's broadcast into a search engine. Robert Anderson. The search results loaded. Leo's eyes widened. He clicked on a link to a local news website. The headline was simple. Local man dies in freak accident. Robert Anderson, age 42, had died. A piece of scaffolding had fallen on him as he walked home from work. His hands trembled as he typed the next name. Maria Sanchez. An obituary appeared. Maria Sanchez, age 67, had passed away in her sleep from a sudden heart attack. He went down the list. David Chen, dead in a car crash. Emily Peterson, a fatal allergic reaction. Every single name he searched for from the first night's broadcast was now dead. They had all died within 24 hours of their name being read on that phantom radio signal. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. A sick, terrible coincidence. But it wasn't. The next day, he checked the names from the second night's recording. The pattern was the same. Susan Miller, James Williams, Patricia Brown. All of them had died. They were all gone. The voice on the radio was not just reading a list of names. It was reading a list of the dead. Or more accurately, a list of the soon-to-be dead. The radio signal was a prophecy. It was a death sentence, broadcast to anyone who happened to be listening in the dark. And Leo was listening. Leo knew he couldn't keep this to himself. This was just too big, too terrifying. He took his recordings and his research to the police. At first, they didn't believe him. They looked at him like he was crazy. I mean, a man who thought a ghost on the radio was predicting deaths? It sounded like something from a movie. They told him to go home. They told him to get some sleep. But Leo was persistent. He showed them the lists. He showed them the obituaries. He played them the recordings of the flat, emotionless voice. Detective Miller was a skeptic. He had been a cop for 20 years. He had seen it all, or so he thought. He listened to Leo's story with a tired sigh, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The names on the lists matched the names in the morgue. The timeline was perfect, too perfect. Miller agreed to look into it. He put a small team on it. They were quiet about it. They didn't want to cause a panic. How could you tell the public that a radio station was killing people? They would never believe it. The investigators started by trying to trace the signal. That was the logical first step. Where was it coming from? They brought in their own technicians. They used sophisticated equipment. They triangulated the signal's origin night after night. Each time, the results were the same. The signal was strong, it was clear, and it was coming from a location just outside of town. A place that everyone knew but no one ever went. It was coming from the old abandoned KSKX radio broadcast tower. This made no sense. The KSKX station had been shut down for over 30 years. The tower was a rusted skeleton against the sky. The building at its base was boarded up and covered in graffiti. There was no electricity running to the property. The equipment inside had been stripped out or had rotted away decades ago. It was a dead place. It was impossible for a powerful radio signal to be coming from there. It was like getting a phone call from a disconnected line. It couldn't happen. And yet, it was. Detective Miller assembled a team. They would go to the old KSKX station. They would see for themselves. He brought Leo along. Leo was the expert, after all. They drove out at dusk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The old radio tower stood against the horizon like a black needle. As they got closer, a sense of unease settled over the group. The air grew still. The world seemed to be holding its breath. The place felt wrong. It felt dead. They cut the chain on the gate and drove up the cracked asphalt drive. The station building was a concrete block, small and windowless. The heavy wooden door was boarded up with thick planks of wood. It took 2 officers with a crowbar to pry it open. The door groaned in protest, and a cloud of dust and the smell of mold and decay billowed out. They switched on their heavy-duty flashlights. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene of total neglect. Wires hung from the ceiling like dead vines. Equipment lay in pieces on the floor, covered in rust and cobwebs. There was no power. The main breaker was off. The lines coming into the building had been cut long ago. There was no transmitter. There was no microphone. There was nothing that could possibly generate a radio signal. Leo walked through the small broadcast booth. He ran his hand over a thick layer of dust on the console. It was a tomb, a silent, forgotten place. How could the signal be coming from here? It defied all logic. It defied the laws of physics. They were standing at the source, and the source was empty. As they stood there in the silent, dusty building, one of the officers' radios crackled to life. "Detective, you there?" It was one of the technicians back at the precinct. "We're monitoring the signal now. It just started." Miller looked at his watch. It was 2:14 a.m. He looked at Leo. Leo's face was pale. "Where is it coming from?" Miller asked into his radio. There was a pause. The voice on the other end came back, shaky and uncertain. "The triangulation is complete. It's coming from your exact location. It's coming from inside that building." A cold fear gripped the room. They were standing in the source, a place with no power, no equipment, and yet the signal was broadcasting from right on top of them. It was impossible. Miller grabbed his radio. "Is the voice on?" he asked, his own voice tight. "Yes, sir," the technician replied. "It's reading the names." A silence fell over the team in the abandoned station. They could not hear it. They were inside the source, but the broadcast was not for them. It was for the outside world. They were in the eye of a storm they couldn't even see. Then, something changed. The technician's voice came over the radio again, frantic this time. "Detective, the list, the names have changed." Miller felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "It's not a new list," the technician stammered. It's still reading. But it just said a new name. It said your name, sir. It said Detective Miller." Every head in the room snapped towards Miller. His face was a mask of disbelief and terror. The unseen listener had become the subject. The hunter had become the hunted. Suddenly, Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his wife. "Leo, turn on the radio. Any station. It's everywhere." His heart hammered against his ribs. He fumbled with the small, portable radio he had brought with him. He turned it on, his hands shaking so much he could barely turn the dial. It didn't matter where he stopped. Every frequency, every station. It was there, the same flat, monotone voice. But it was no longer just on 88.9 FM. It had spread. It was everywhere. It was on the pop station, the classical station, the news station. The voice was no longer faint. It was crystal clear, and it was speaking a new name, a name that made Leo's world stop. "Leo," the voice said, as if it were right next to his ear. "Leo Martinez." He dropped the radio. It clattered on the concrete floor. The voice echoed from the small speaker. "Leo Martinez." The other officers were staring at him now, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They were all on the list. The signal wasn't just broadcasting from the station anymore. It was broadcasting about the station. It knew they were there. It was watching them. Panic erupted. The signal was no longer a secret. It was public. It was on every radio, every car stereo, every clock radio in every bedroom. People across the city, across the country were hearing it. They were hearing the endless list of names. At first, there was confusion. Then, the story started to spread. People recognized the names. A friend, a coworker, a neighbor. And then they heard the news reports. They learned that the people on the list were dying. The hidden horror was now a public spectacle. The world was listening to an executioner's list, and no one knew how to turn it off. People started calling the radio stations, the police, the news outlets. They were terrified. They were asking questions no one could answer. What was this? Where was it coming from? But the most terrifying question was the one they whispered to themselves in the dark. The one they were afraid to ask out loud. Will it say my name? People huddled by their radios, both terrified of what they might hear and unable to turn away. And then the worst thing happened. A person listening in their kitchen heard their own name. A mother heard the name of her child sleeping in the next room. A husband heard the name of his wife sitting beside him on the sofa. The broadcast was no longer about strangers. It was about them. The signal had found them. The list was not random. It was personal. Had their names been on the list from the beginning? Or did listening to the broadcast somehow put you on the list? Did curiosity kill more than the cat? No one knows where the signal came from. Some say it was a message from the future, a grim schedule of events that could not be changed. Others believe it was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent that was awakened. The signal is still out there. It never stops. It is a constant, quiet hum beneath the noise of the world. Most people have learned to ignore it. They have to. But every now and then, late at night, when you are all alone, you can still hear it if you listen closely. Are you listening? Have you been chosen already?